I want to share something with you today that changed my entire understanding of wealth, prosperity, and abundance. For years, I watched people struggle, strain, and fight for every dollar that came their way. I watched brilliant minds work themselves to exhaustion, only to find that money slipped through their fingers like water. And I also watched others, who seemed to do very little physical labor, attract wealth as naturally as flowers attract bees. This puzzled me deeply until I discovered something extraordinary, something that the universe has been trying to whisper to us all along. You see, there are laws operating in this universe that are just as reliable as the law of gravity. You don't see gravity, you can't touch it, you can't argue with it, but you know it's there because when you drop something, it falls. Every single time. No exceptions. Well, my dear friend, there are invisible laws governing wealth and prosperity that work with the same absolute certainty. The problem is, nobody ever taught us these laws. We weren't raised understanding them. We were taught to work hard, save our pennies, fear poverty, and grip tightly to whatever we could gather. But that old way of thinking, that fearful, grasping approach to money, actually pushes wealth away from us. I'm Florence Scovel Shinn, and I've spent years studying the invisible forces that govern our lives, watching how thought becomes form, how words create reality, and how the images we hold in our minds shape everything we experience. What I'm about to share with you isn't theory, it isn't wishful thinking or empty positive talk. These are actual laws, spiritual principles that operate whether you believe in them or not, just like gravity works whether you believe in it or not. The difference is, when you understand these laws and begin working with them instead of against them, your entire financial reality can transform in ways that will astonish you. Now, I need you to understand something right from the start. What I'm sharing with you today isn't about manipulating the universe or tricking God into giving you things. It's not about greed or selfishness or getting something for nothing. These laws are about alignment. They're about understanding how the universe actually functions and then adjusting your thoughts, your words, and your beliefs so that you're swimming with the current instead of against it. Imagine trying to row a boat upstream your whole life when there was a powerful downstream current available to you all along. That's what most people are doing with money. They're fighting against the very laws that could carry them to abundance. Now, I want to share with you the first great spiritual law of prosperity, and it's going to sound almost too simple, but I promise you, in its simplicity lies its power. The law of giving and receiving. You see, money is not a thing to be hoarded. It's not a static object. Money is energy in motion. It must circulate. When you dam up a river, the water becomes stagnant. When you hoard money, you create stagnation in your financial life. And what's worse, you send a message to the universe that screams, "There isn't enough. I must hold tight to what I have, because more isn't coming." I've watched this play out in the most heartbreaking ways. I knew a woman once who had inherited a considerable sum. She was, by all accounts, financially secure. But she lived like a pauper. Every penny was scrutinized. Every expense was an agony. She wore threadbare clothes and ate the cheapest food, not because she needed to, but because she was terrified. Terrified that if she let any money go, she'd end up destitute. And you know what happened? Her fear became her reality, not because she spent herself into poverty, but because her consciousness of lack attracted more lack. She developed health problems that required expensive treatments. Her home needed costly repairs. The universe, in its perfect responsiveness, gave her exactly what she believed, that money flows away and doesn't return. Contrast that with another person I guided, a young man with barely anything to his name, but he understood this principle of circulation. When he got his modest paycheck, he would always, without fail, give something. Sometimes it was to someone who needed it more. Sometimes it was to a cause he believed in. Sometimes he simply bought coffee for the person behind him in line. "Miss Shinn," he told me once, "I may not have much, but I've got enough to share, and sharing makes me feel abundant." Do you see the difference in consciousness? He felt abundant with little. She felt poor with much. And here's what happened to him. Opportunities began appearing. A better job seemed to find him. People wanted to help him. Unexpected checks arrived. Within 2 years, his financial situation had completely transformed, not through struggle, but through flow. This is not coincidence. This is law. When you give freely, joyfully, without resentment, you make a bold statement to the universe. I have plenty. I trust there is more coming. I am a channel, not a container. And the universe must respond to that consciousness. But here's where people get confused. They think, well, I'll give so that I can get more. No, no, no. That's manipulation, not giving. That's still coming from lack. True giving comes from a sense of abundance already present within you. You give because it feels good, because it's natural. Because you recognize that in giving, you are participating in the great circulation of life itself. Think about your own body for a moment. Your heart doesn't hold on to blood, terrified it won't get more. It pumps it out, trusts the circulation, and receives it back renewed. Your lungs don't cling to air. They release it and trust that the next breath is already there, waiting to be inhaled. This is how you must be with money. Breathe it in, breathe it out. Receive it, release it, trust the circulation. And just as you trust your lungs to breathe without forcing them, trust your abundance to flow without strangling it. I've seen people hold their breath financially, clutching, grasping, afraid to exhale. They receive money and immediately grip it with white knuckles, terrified it won't come back. But that's like holding your breath and wondering why you feel suffocated. You must exhale to inhale. You must release to receive. Now, I want to address something that trips people up constantly. They say to me, Florence, I'm visualizing wealth, I'm affirming prosperity, but I'm terrified. And I tell them, fear and faith cannot occupy the same space. You cannot hold a vision of abundance while simultaneously preparing for disaster. You cannot affirm prosperity while mentally planning for poverty. It's like trying to drive forward with one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. You'll just burn out the engine of your life. This is where the real spiritual work begins. Not in the pretty affirmations or the vision boards, though those have their place, but in the moment-by-moment choice between fear and faith. Every single day, you're going to have opportunities to choose. The bill comes, the expense appears, the unexpected cost arrives, and in that moment, you have a choice. Will you panic and contract, or will you breathe and trust? I remember a woman who came to me in absolute terror. Her business had slowed down, her savings were dwindling, and she was, as she put it, staring into the abyss. She'd been doing all the right spiritual practices, she insisted, but nothing was working. So I asked her a simple question. In your mind, what do you rehearse most often? The silence that followed told me everything. Finally, she admitted, I imagine losing everything. I see myself unable to pay rent. I picture having to ask family for money. I rehearse the conversation where I admit I've failed. There it was. She was praying for prosperity with her lips while visualizing disaster with her imagination. And your imagination, my dear, is your creative workshop. Whatever you consistently imagine, you are building in consciousness. And what you build in consciousness must eventually manifest in form. This is not punishment. This is law. The same law that says a seed becomes a plant, that a thought becomes a thing. So I gave her an assignment. Every time she found herself rehearsing disaster, she was to stop immediately and ask, is this what I want to create? And if not, and it never was, she was to deliberately turn her imagination toward what she did want. Not as wishful thinking, as construction. She began to imagine herself easily paying her bills. She pictured money flowing to her from unexpected sources. She saw herself generous and free and resourceful. She rehearsed conversations where she celebrated her abundance rather than confessed her lack. And within 3 weeks, her business began to shift. New clients appeared, old clients returned, an unexpected refund arrived. A creative idea came that opened an entirely new income stream. Was it magic? No, it was law. She changed the pattern in consciousness, and the outer world rearranged itself to match. The thing is, most people are walking around holding a picture of what they don't want. They're running their mental projector backwards. They're using this magnificent creative force to perfectly manifest the very situations they're trying to escape. I see it constantly. A woman came to me terrified of poverty. Every morning, she'd wake up calculating, counting pennies, imagining worst-case scenarios. What if I can't pay rent? What if they shut off the electricity? What if I end up on the street? She was a perfect demonstration of faith, just pointed in the wrong direction. She had absolute conviction in lack, and the universe said, "Your word is law," and delivered precisely that. I asked her a simple question. If you put this much energy into imaging abundance, what do you suppose would happen? She looked at me like I'd asked her to fly. But the bills are times real asterisk, she said. And there it is, the great illusion. We think the outer circumstances are the reality, and our thoughts are just commentary. Reactions, harmless little whispers inside our heads. No, it's the exact opposite. Your thoughts are the most powerful force in your life. They are the pattern, the template, and the architect's blueprint. The outer world is just the construction crew following orders. Every single thing you're experiencing right now, every relationship, every bank balance, every health condition, every opportunity or lack thereof, started as a thought pattern, a belief, a mental image you held long enough for the universe to set it in concrete. Now, I can hear some of you saying, "But Florence, I never times wanted times to be sick. I never times chose times this loneliness. I certainly didn't times ask times for financial struggle." Not consciously, perhaps. But here's what you must understand. Your subconscious mind doesn't argue. It doesn't filter. It doesn't distinguish between what you want and what you fear. It simply accepts the images you feed it most consistently and says, "Yes, this must be important. Let's make more of this." Fear is faith in reverse. Worry is prayer for what you don't want. And the universe is a perfect yes man. It has never once said, "Oh, you don't times really times mean that." It takes you at your word, every single time. That woman who was terrified of poverty, I gave her a new assignment. Every night before sleep, when the subconscious is most receptive, she was to picture her mailbox overflowing with checks, to see herself paying bills with ease, with money left over, to feel the relief, the freedom, the security of abundance. She resisted at first. "But it feels like lying." "No," I told her. "What you've been doing imagining disaster times, that's times the lie. This is aligning with truth, with the inexhaustible supply that is your divine birthright." 3 weeks later, she received an unexpected inheritance from a distant relative she barely remembered. Not a fortune, but enough to stabilize her situation completely. Coincidence? The universe doesn't do coincidence. It does correspondence. As within, so without. You see, the moment she stopped holding the pattern of poverty in her mind, the universe no longer had orders to deliver it. She canceled the contract. She changed the channel. And reality, being the obedient servant it is, had no choice but to shift. Because here's what most people don't understand about faith. It's not something you feel, it's something you do. You don't wait until you believe it. You act as if it's already done, and the belief follows. This is why affirmations work, not because they're magic words, but because they redirect your attention. They interrupt the spiral. They give your consciousness something new to build with. A woman came to me once, drowning in debt. Every morning, she woke up with a knot in her stomach. Every bill that arrived felt like a sentencing. She was so consumed by lack that she couldn't see anything else. I told her, "Every time you think about money, say this: I am a magnet for financial miracles. Money flows to me easily and effortlessly." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "But it's not true," she said. "I can barely pay rent." "That's exactly why you need to say it," I told her. "Because right now, your mind is a broken record playing poverty on repeat, and the universe, your faithful producer, is giving you exactly what you're broadcasting." She agreed to try it, though I could tell she thought it was nonsense. 2 weeks later, she called me. A relative she hadn't spoken to in years had passed away and left her a small inheritance. Not a fortune, but enough to clear her debts and start fresh. Coincidence? Perhaps. But I've seen this pattern too many times to dismiss it. She didn't just receive money, she shifted her frequency. She stopped being a vibrational match for lack and became a match for abundance. And the universe, ever faithful, delivered. Now, let me be clear. This doesn't mean you sit on your couch chanting affirmations and waiting for checks to fall from the sky. That's delusion, not faith. Faith requires action. It requires you to move as though the outcome is certain. If you're looking for a job, if you don't just visualize employment, you polish your resume, you reach out to contacts, you show up to interviews as someone who already knows they're valuable. If you're seeking love, you don't just dream about your soulmate, you become the person that kind of love would be attracted to. You clear out the old patterns, the bitterness, the stories about how all the good ones are taken. You act as if, and in the acting, the truth emerges. This is the secret that every mystic, every master teacher has tried to convey. Your outer world is a reflection of your inner world. Not someday, not eventually, right now. You are always manifesting. The question is, what? Most people are manifesting their fears without even realizing it. They're so focused on what they don't want that they forget to place an order for what they do want. It's like walking into a restaurant and spending the entire meal telling the waiter, "I don't want liver, I definitely don't want mushrooms, please, no anchovies." And then being shocked when you sit there hungry. You have to say what you want, clearly, boldly, without apology, because the universe doesn't respond to your wishful thinking, it responds to your conviction. And conviction isn't something you wait to feel, it's something you practice. When a child learns to walk, she doesn't wait for confidence. She stands, she falls, she stands again. Each time, her body remembers, her muscles learn, her balance shifts. And one day, without announcement, without fanfare, she walks across the room as though she's always known how. This is how you train conviction. You don't think your way into it. You don't analyze your way into it. You embody it, one repetition at a time, until your entire being remembers what your mind once doubted. I watch people tie themselves in knots, trying to fix their faith. They say, "But Florence, I tried affirming once, and nothing happened. Once." As though the universe were a vending machine, where you insert one coin of belief and expect the prize to drop immediately into your waiting hands. That's not faith, that's bargaining. Faith is the woman who speaks her word every morning, not because she sees evidence yet, but because she's planted a seed and she trusts the soil. She doesn't dig up the garden every afternoon to check if roots have formed. She waters, she tends. She waits with active expectancy, not passive hoping. There's a difference. Passive hoping says, maybe someday, if I'm lucky, if the stars align, if I've been good enough. It's weak, apologetic. It shrinks in the face of opposition. Active expectancy says, I have called this into being, I am watching for it, I am ready. It stands firm. It doesn't waver when someone asks, but how, or when, or, are you sure? Because the person living in active expectancy isn't convincing others. She's already convinced herself. And here's what happens when you stop defending your vision to people who can't see it. You reclaim the energy you were scattering into arguments and explanations, and you pour it back into the thing itself. Every time you justify your dream to a skeptic, you weaken it. Not because their doubt has power, but because you're treating your vision like something that needs permission, like something fragile, like something that might not survive scrutiny. Your word doesn't need defending, it needs declaring. I knew a man once brilliant in business, broke in consciousness. He would speak about his ventures with words like hopefully and maybe and we'll see. Then he'd wonder why investors passed him over, why doors stayed closed, why his best ideas died in the boardroom. I told him, you're asking permission for what you should be announcing as fact. He didn't understand at first, so I had him practice. Every morning, he stood in front of a mirror and declared his success in the present tense. My business thrives. Capital flows to me easily. I am a magnet for the right partners and opportunities. The first week, he felt ridiculous. The second week, he felt mechanical. The third week, something shifted. Not in his circumstances, nothing visible yet, but in his posture. His tone, the way he walked into rooms. 6 weeks later, he secured the funding he'd been chasing for months. But more importantly, he no longer times chased asterisk. He times received asterisk. Because he'd finally stopped asking the universe, is this allowed, and started commanding, this is mine. That's the pivot point most people miss. They think manifestation is about asking nicely, being humble, staying small so as not to offend the cosmos with their audacity. But humility and powerlessness are not the same thing. True humility knows the source of all supply and bows to it. False humility pretends it's noble to stay stuck, to suffer, to deny yourself what God has already prepared. You are not being spiritual by staying broke. You're not being righteous by staying sick. You're not earning heaven by accepting less than your divine inheritance. The universe, infinite, abundant, endlessly creative, didn't design you for lack. It didn't breathe life into you so you could spend your days justifying why you don't deserve more. You were made in the image and likeness of infinite supply. That's not poetry, that's spiritual law. And yet, I watch people twist themselves into knots, trying to convince themselves that wanting more is somehow unspiritual. They've confused poverty with piety, They've made martyrs of themselves, and they call it humility. But true humility isn't denying your worth. True humility is recognizing that you are a channel for infinite abundance, and that by claiming your good, you're actually honoring the creative force that flows through you. Listen to what I'm telling you. When you accept crumbs, you're not being humble, you're blocking the flow. You're telling the universe, no, thank you. I don't trust your supply. I'll manage on my own with these scraps. And the universe? It simply honors your declaration. It says, your word is law. If you insist on struggle, struggle you shall have. This is what people don't understand about spiritual law. It's impersonal. It doesn't care about your backstory. It doesn't give you points for suffering. It responds to your mental equivalent, the sum total of your beliefs, expectations, and habitual thoughts. If your mental equivalent is lack, no amount of hard work will bring you abundance. You'll work yourself to exhaustion, and somehow, mysteriously, the money will slip through your fingers. Unexpected expenses, bad timing, someone else gets the promotion. The opportunity evaporates just as you reach for it. And you'll think it's bad luck. You'll think the world is against you. But it's not the world, it's your consciousness. I knew a woman once, brilliant woman, worked harder than anyone I'd ever met. Up before dawn, asleep after midnight, every single day. And yet she lived in perpetual financial anxiety. There was always something, a bill she'd forgotten, a payment that came due early, a sudden emergency that wiped out whatever she'd managed to save. One day she said to me, Florence, I don't understand. I do everything right. Why does God punish me like this? And I said, God isn't punishing you. You're punishing yourself with your thoughts. She looked at me like I'd struck her. But I continued, every morning you wake up dreading the mailbox. Every time the phone rings, you expect bad news. You've been practicing poverty in your mind for so long, it's become your reality. You're a master at it, and the universe is giving you exactly what you've mastered. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, so what do I do? You change the pattern. I told her, you plant new seeds. You start speaking the word of abundance over your life, even when everything visible contradicts it. You claim your good before you see it. Even when I'm afraid? Especially when you're afraid. Fear is just a signal that you're about to break through to something new. The old pattern is fighting to survive. She started small. Every morning, before her feet hit the floor, she'd say, Infinite Spirit, open the way for my immediate supply. Let all that is mine by divine right now reach me in perfect ways. She didn't believe it at first. She felt ridiculous saying it, but she kept going. And slowly, not overnight, but steadily, things shifted. An old debt was forgiven. A client she'd forgotten about sent payment. Someone recommended her for work that paid 3 times her usual rate. Were these miracles? Not in the way most people think of miracles. They were the natural result of a changed consciousness. She stopped declaring lack. She started declaring supply. And the universe rearranged itself to match her new declaration. This is available to you right now, not someday, not when you're more evolved or more deserving, right now. I watch people put conditions on their worthiness. I'll feel successful when I have the money. I'll feel attractive when I lose the weight. I'll feel lovable when I find the relationship. But this is placing the cart before the horse. The feeling must come first. The inner acceptance must precede the outer manifestation. Your subconscious mind doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. And what you are is determined by the state you habitually occupy, not the circumstances you're currently experiencing. There was a woman who came to me absolutely convinced she was unlucky in love. Every relationship ended the same way. Every man disappointed her. She had story after story to prove her point. And I said to her, you're not unlucky in love. You're committed to a story about being unlucky in love. And the universe, being the perfect servant it is, keeps giving you evidence for the story you insist on telling. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. But these things really happened, she protested. Yes, I said, they happened, but they don't have to keep happening. The moment you release the story, you release the pattern. We spent weeks working on this. Not analyzing why men had disappointed her, not digging through childhood wounds, but simply practicing the feeling of being loved, appreciated, cherished without any evidence, without any man, without any external validation. Just the pure practice of the state. And within 2 months, she met someone completely different from her usual type. Someone kind, consistent, emotionally available. She almost didn't recognize the opportunity because it didn't match her old pattern. That's what happens when you change states. The entire playing field changes. You stop attracting what you don't want because you're no longer resonating at that frequency. You're broadcasting something entirely new. Think of yourself as a radio station. For years, you've been broadcasting on the frequency of lack, fear, unworthiness, and life, like a faithful radio receiver, has been picking up your signal and reflecting it back to you. But the moment you change your frequency, the moment you begin broadcasting confidence, abundance, love, the receiver must pick up that new signal. It has no choice. It's law. This is not about pretending. This is not about affirmations you don't believe. This is about genuinely occupying a new state until it becomes your natural residence. And yes, at first it will feel strange. It will feel like trying on clothes that don't quite fit yet. Your old identity will scream at you that you're being fake, that you're lying to yourself, that this isn't who you really are. That voice is not your friend. That voice is the ego, desperately clinging to the familiar, even if the familiar is painful. Because to the ego, familiar pain is safer than unfamiliar joy. But you must persist. You must, with gentle firmness, continue to occupy the state you desire until it no longer feels like something you're doing but simply who you are. I think of a man I worked with who wanted to be financially abundant. For years he'd struggled, always just getting by, always one emergency away from disaster. We didn't talk about business strategies or investment opportunities. We talked about identity. Who are you being? I asked him. Are you being the man who struggles or the man who thrives? And he was honest. I'm being the man who struggles. That's all I know. Then that's all you'll ever experience, I said. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because you're giving it very clear instructions. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. But how do I change it? I've been this person my whole life. You change it the same way you learned it, I told him. Through repetition, through practice, through catching yourself in the old pattern and consciously choosing the new one. This is where most people stumble. They think transformation should be instant, that once they understand the principle, everything should shift immediately. But your subconscious mind didn't learn your current patterns in a day, and it won't unlearn them in a day either. Think of it like learning a new language. At first, you have to consciously construct every sentence. You stumble over words. You translate in your head. But with practice, with repetition, it becomes natural. Eventually, you think in the new language without effort. Your self-concept is the same. Right now, you're fluent in limitation. You speak it without thinking. Every reaction, every assumption, every automatic response flows from that language of lack. But you can become fluent in abundance. You can learn to speak the language of the wish fulfilled so naturally that it becomes your default setting. I had a client who was masterful at worry. She could take any situation and find 17 ways it might go wrong. She'd been doing this since childhood. It was her survival mechanism, her way of feeling prepared for disaster. When she came to me, she said, I know I shouldn't worry, but I can't help it. It's automatic. Then we make a new automatic, I said. Every time you catch yourself worrying, you stop and deliberately imagine the best possible outcome instead. Not as a Pollyanna fantasy, but as a genuine possibility you're choosing to focus on. That feels irresponsible, she confessed. Does your worry prevent bad things from happening? I asked. She paused. No. Does it help you handle things better when they do happen? No. Usually I'm so exhausted from worrying that I handle things worse. Then what exactly are you being responsible to by worrying? She had no answer. Because worry, like any habitual thought pattern, isn't really serving you. It's just familiar. And we mistake familiarity for necessity. She began the practice. At first, it felt forced, artificial. She'd catch herself spiraling into anxiety about her son, her health, her finances, and she'd deliberately pivot. She'd imagine him thriving, herself vital, her needs met. Not with force, not with desperation, but with gentle, persistent repetition. Within 3 months, her default setting had shifted. She no longer had to work so hard to redirect her thoughts. Her mind naturally moved toward possibility instead of catastrophe. And here's what's extraordinary. Her life didn't just feel better, it actually got better. Her son, whom she'd been worried about, found his footing. Her health improved. Money came from unexpected sources. Was this because the universe rewarded her positive thinking? No. It's because when you're not consumed by worry, you make different choices. You see different opportunities. You show up differently in the world, and the world responds to who you're being. This is the practical magic of shifting your self-concept. You're not trying to manipulate reality from the outside. You're transforming yourself from the inside, and reality shifts to match. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Your self-concept doesn't just affect what you do, it affects what you perceive. Two people can live in the exact same circumstances and have completely different experiences because they're experiencing those circumstances through different self-concepts. It's like wearing tinted glasses. If you're wearing red tinted glasses, everything looks red. If you're wearing blue tinted glasses, everything looks blue. And here's the thing, you can't see the color of your own glasses while you're wearing them. They feel completely invisible to you, even though they're coloring absolutely everything you see. Your self-concept is those glasses. It's the lens through which you interpret every single experience, and most people don't realize they're wearing them. I'll give you an example. Let's say someone criticizes you at work. If your self-concept is, "I'm incompetent," you'll interpret that criticism as confirmation of a truth you already believed. You'll think, "See? They've figured out that I don't belong here. I knew I wasn't good enough." And you'll probably shrink back, stop taking risks, maybe even start looking for another job. But if your self-concept is, "I'm constantly growing and learning," you'll interpret that exact same criticism completely differently. You'll think, "Interesting feedback. What can I learn from this?" You might even feel grateful for the insight. Same words, same situation, completely different experience. This is why affirmations alone don't work for most people. You can stand in front of a mirror and say, "I am confident," 1,000 times. But if your self-concept is, "I'm someone who struggles with confidence," those words will bounce right off. They won't stick. Because underneath, you don't really believe them. You're just putting words on top of a foundation that contradicts those words. Real change happens when you shift the foundation, when you change the self-concept itself. And the beautiful thing is, you absolutely can do this. Your self-concept isn't fixed. It's not permanent. It's just a habit of thought. And like any habit, it can be changed. But you have to understand something crucial. You can't change your self-concept by fighting against it or trying to force yourself to think differently. That creates resistance. That creates inner conflict. And inner conflict always weakens you. Instead, you change your self-concept by gently and persistently replacing old assumptions with new ones. You do it by catching yourself when you're thinking from the old self-concept and choosing in that moment to think from the new one instead. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say you've always thought of yourself as someone who's bad with money. That's your self-concept around finances. And because of that self-concept, you probably have a whole collection of habits and patterns that support it. You don't look at your bank account, you impulse buy. You feel anxious whenever money comes up. You tell stories about how you've always been this way. Now, if you want to change your financial reality, you could try to change all those individual behaviors one by one. You could force yourself to budget, track your spending, save a certain percentage, and maybe you'd see some temporary improvement. But it would feel like an uphill battle every single day because you'd be fighting against your own self-concept. The deeper way, the way that actually creates lasting change, is to shift the self-concept itself. To begin thinking of yourself as someone who's naturally good with money. Not in some distant future, but right now, as a present fact, because here's what happens when you make that shift. When you stop treating wealth as a reward, you might someday earn and start treating it as something that naturally flows to and through you, everything changes. The universe doesn't respond to your wishes, it responds to your assumptions. If you assume you're bad with money, the universe will arrange circumstances to prove you right. You'll lose the receipt you needed. The unexpected bill will arrive. The investment opportunity will slip through your fingers at the last moment. But when you assume you're someone who handles money well, who attracts it easily, who makes wise decisions naturally, the universe rushes to confirm that too. I've seen this play out in the most ordinary moments. A woman I knew changed nothing about her behavior, except her internal narrative. She stopped saying, "I can't afford it," and started saying, "That's not where I choose to spend my resources right now." Same outcome, she didn't buy the thing, but completely different energy. Within 3 weeks, she received an unexpected refund from an insurance overpayment she'd forgotten about. Her boss offered her additional hours. A friend paid back a loan she'd written off years ago. Nothing magical happened. She simply stopped broadcasting scarcity and started broadcasting sufficiency. And the universe, which is always listening, always responding, shifted its delivery to match her new signal. This is why affirmations alone don't work if there's no belief behind them. You can say, "I am prosperous" 1,000 times, but if every time you say it, there's a little voice that immediately adds, "Yeah, right," you're not affirming prosperity. You're affirming doubt. The words have to land in consciousness as truth, not as hope, not as wishful thinking, as simple, present fact. And here's the part most people miss. You don't have to believe it perfectly all the time. You're not going to wake up tomorrow completely certain of your wealth. That's not how consciousness shifts. It happens in moments. In choices, you practice it the way you'd practice anything else. You catch yourself in the old pattern, the complaining, the worry, the mental rehearsal of scarcity, and you gently redirect. Not through force, not through gritting your teeth and trying to think positively while your whole body is tense with fear. Through recognition, through seeing the old pattern as just that, a pattern. Familiar, habitual, but not true. And then you choose again. This moment, this choice, this thought. That's all you ever have, this present moment. And in this moment, you're not broke or struggling or behind. You're simply here, breathing, choosing what to think next. You can choose anxiety, or you can choose trust. You can choose the story of not enough, or you can choose the story of abundant supply. Both feel like truth when you're in them. Both will gather evidence, both will create momentum. But only one leads where you actually want to go. And here's what makes this whole thing so much simpler than people think. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to know how the money will come or what form it will take. You just need to stop arguing for your limitations. Stop telling the story of why it can't work. Stop explaining to everyone who'll listen why your situation is different, why it's harder for you, why the principles that work for others won't work in your case. Every time you do that, you're not being realistic. You're being loyal to struggle. You're choosing difficulty over demonstration. You're choosing the familiar comfort of complaint over the unfamiliar territory of manifestation. And here's what's really happening. You've made struggle part of your identity. It's become who you think you are. When things start to improve, you actually feel uncomfortable. When the path becomes clear, you create new complications. When opportunity knocks, you point out everything that could go wrong. Not because you're wise or cautious, but because ease feels foreign to you. You've worn struggle for so long it feels like your skin. I've watched this pattern destroy beautiful futures. Someone is right on the edge of breakthrough. The job is materializing. The relationship is healing. The money is flowing. And they sabotage it with one last round of "but what if?" They snatch defeat from the jaws of victory because victory doesn't match their self-concept. They've been the struggler, the overlooked one, the person things are hard for, and success would require becoming someone new. And becoming someone new feels like death to the ego. Your ego would rather be right about how hard everything is than experience the ease you claim to want. It would rather protect its story than receive its demonstration. So you need to make a choice. A real one. Not the kind you make emotionally at midnight when you're inspired. The kind you make with your entire being and then prove with your words the next morning. Are you committed to your excuses or your expectations? Because you cannot be committed to both. Are you going to keep explaining your limitations, or are you going to start declaring your demonstrations? Are you going to describe what's wrong or decree what's right? Are you going to be loyal to your past patterns or faithful to your desired future? This is where the spiritual path stops being comfortable philosophy and becomes uncomfortable practice. Because practice means you have to watch your mouth even when you're tired, especially when you're tired. It means you speak your word, even when your bank account is screaming a different story. It means you claim you're good even when everyone around you is comparing problems like they're trading cards. I'm not asking you to be fake. I'm asking you to be faithful. Faithful to the law, faithful to the word you speak, faithful to the vision you hold. There's nothing false about declaring truth before you see evidence. That's not denial, that's how creation works. The word comes first. Always. The visible follows the invisible. The manifestation follows the conviction. You think you're being honest when you describe your problems in detail. But you're not being honest, you're being hypnotized. Hypnotized by conditions. hypnotized by appearances. Hypnotized by the three-dimensional world that is nothing more than a shadow of consciousness anyway. Real honesty would be admitting that you have the power to change everything with your word. Real honesty would be confessing that you've been creating your complications with your conversations. Real honesty would be acknowledging that you are not a victim of circumstance, but a user of spiritual law, either consciously or unconsciously. And if you've been using it unconsciously against yourself, you can start using it consciously for yourself. Right now, this moment. Not when you feel better, not when the situation improves, not when you have more faith. Now, because the moment you declare your good is done, you stop pushing it away. You stop being the anxious beggar at the gates of your own kingdom. You become the ruler who knows the treasury is already full. A friend once told me she couldn't affirm abundance while her bank account showed $73. It feels like lying, she said. And I understood. I truly did. Because we've been trained to call things as our physical eyes see them. But there's a difference between lying and speaking from a higher knowing. When you affirm you're good, you're not denying what appears to be true. You're declaring what is true in the invisible realm that governs all visible things. You're not pretending the $73 isn't there. You're refusing to let that number define what's possible for you. You're speaking to the substance behind all supply, the infinite reservoir that doesn't know scarcity. That woman began saying, God is my instant, constant, and abundant supply. Not will be, is. She said it driving to work. She said it paying bills. She said it when the fear rose up in her throat. And something shifted. Not overnight, though, sometimes it is overnight. But steadily, clients appeared, opportunities opened. Within 3 months, her income had tripled. Within 6, she had more in savings than she'd ever thought possible. Was it the words themselves? No. Words are simply vehicles. It was her willingness to stand in the consciousness of abundance, even when everything visible contradicted it. She stopped arguing for her limitations and started entertaining a new possibility. This is where most people abandon the path, right at the threshold. They speak their word once, twice, 10 times. They look around, see no immediate change, and conclude it doesn't work. I tried affirmations, they say, with a dismissive wave. But what they really mean is, I tried it briefly, and when reality didn't instantly reshape itself to my preference, I went back to my old way of thinking. You cannot plant a seed and dig it up every day to see if it's growing. You plant it, water it, and trust the intelligence within the seed to do what seeds do. Your word is the seed. Your consciousness is the soil. Faith is the watering. And patience, oh, patience. Patience is simply knowing that the harvest is already determined the moment the seed goes into fertile ground. I watched my own demonstrations get delayed time and again because I would plant my seed, speak my word with conviction, and then immediately begin checking for sprouts. Where is it? Why isn't it here yet? Maybe I didn't say it right. That frantic checking is actually uprooting the seed. It's saying, I don't really trust this process. Show me proof so I can believe. But the universe doesn't respond to that energy. It responds to the energy of it is done. It responds to the consciousness that has already moved into the reality of the fulfilled desire. Think of it this way. If you placed an order at a fine restaurant, you wouldn't walk into the kitchen every 2 minutes demanding to see your meal. You'd return to your table, knowing the chef is preparing it. You'd relax. You might enjoy conversation. You'd trust that when it's ready, it will be brought to you. That's how demonstration works. You place your order with the universe through your word. Then you live as though it's already being prepared. You get ready for it. You make space for it. You thank the invisible chef. I know someone right now is thinking, but what if nothing happens? What if I affirm and nothing changes? And I want to address this directly, because it's the fear beneath all fear when it comes to this work. Here's what I've learned after years of both spectacular demonstrations and apparent delays. Something is always happening, always. Energy is always responding to your consciousness. But sometimes what needs to happen first is an inner shift, not an outer one. Sometimes old beliefs need to be dissolved before new conditions can form. Sometimes the demonstration needs to come through a channel you haven't even considered yet, and that channel is still being prepared. And here is where people most often give up. They've been affirming for weeks, maybe months. They've visualized, they've spoken the word, they've tried to hold the feeling. But nothing in the physical world has changed yet. The bills are still there. The relationship is still strained. The opportunity hasn't appeared. And so they conclude, this doesn't work. Spiritual law doesn't apply to me. I'm the exception. But you are never the exception. The law is impersonal. It works for everyone, every time, without favor or discrimination. The sun doesn't shine on some gardens and skip others based on worthiness. It shines on all equally. What determines the harvest is the soil, the seed, and the tending. So when there appears to be a delay, I ask you to consider, what am I still watering? What thoughts are you returning to in the quiet moments? What conversations are you having with yourself when no one else is listening? Because those are the seeds that are really being nourished, and the subconscious is literal. It doesn't judge or edit. It simply accepts and manifests. I once knew a woman who affirmed daily for prosperity. Her words were beautiful, her vision clear. But every night before bed, she would lie awake, calculating how many days she had left before disaster. She would rehearse conversations with creditors. She would imagine worst-case scenarios in vivid detail. And then she wondered why her affirmations seemed powerless. The affirmation was a seed planted in the morning, but the fear was a flood that washed it away each night, and the subconscious, receiving both, manifested the dominant vibration, which was fear, not faith. This is why I say the timing is never about punishment or cosmic delay. It's about alignment. When the inner truly matches the outer, you wish to see when the feeling is natural, not forced. Manifestation is instantaneous, not in effort, but in recognition. You suddenly see the opportunity that was already there. You suddenly receive the call you'd been waiting for. You suddenly understand the path forward that had been obscured by your own anxiety. And sometimes, the delay is mercy. I have seen people beg and plead for things that, had they received them in that state of consciousness, would have destroyed them. A large sum of money in the hands of poverty consciousness becomes a burden, not a blessing. A relationship founded on desperation becomes a cage, not a partnership. Success without the inner foundation to sustain it becomes a tower built on sand. So the universe, in its infinite intelligence, waits. Not because it is withholding, but because it is preparing you. It is building the consciousness that can receive, hold, and multiply the blessing. It is clearing out the old beliefs that would sabotage the new good. It is aligning circumstances you cannot see, so that when the door opens, you are ready to walk through it and stay through it. The universe does not reward haste, it rewards readiness. And readiness is not something you can fake. It is not something you can perform. You cannot trick God with a vision board and a smile while your inner world is in chaos. The universe sees through the performance to the consciousness beneath it, and it responds not to what you say you want, but to what you truly believe you deserve. This is why so many affirmations fail. The words are beautiful, but the consciousness beneath them is still soaked in fear, still clinging to unworthiness, still whispering, yes, but not for me. You say, I am abundant, but your inner voice says, who am I kidding? You declare, I am worthy, but your actions say, I don't matter. You affirm, my good is on the way, but your energy says, it's probably lost in the mail. The universe does not respond to your words, it responds to your vibration. And your vibration is determined not by what you speak, but by what you believe when no one is listening. So the delay, the waiting, the silence, it is giving you time to align your words with your belief, to let your consciousness catch up with your desire, to close the gap between who you say you are and who you are becoming. This is sacred work. This is not busy work or filler. This is the real transformation. And when the two come into alignment, when your word and your consciousness become one, heaven and earth move, the invisible becomes visible. The promised becomes actual. What was always yours in the spiritual realm materializes in the physical world, not because you forced it, but because you finally became a match for it. I have watched this happen again and again. A woman spent years declaring she wanted a partner, but every relationship ended in heartbreak. She came to me frustrated, angry, asking why love kept passing her by. I said, love is not passing you by, you are passing it by. You do not yet believe you are worthy of being cherished. She protested. She listed all the affirmations she had done, all the journals she had written, but I asked her one question. When you are alone, what do you say to yourself? She fell silent. And then the truth came. I say, I'm too much, I'm difficult, I'm not the kind of woman men stay for. There it was, the hidden belief, the consciousness beneath the words. And so, we began the real work. Not more affirmations, but dismantling the lie. Every day, she spoke a new truth. I am easy to love. I am worth staying for. I am a woman men cherish. And every day, she acted as though it were already true. She stopped tolerating crumbs. She stopped auditioning for approval. She moved through the world as a woman who already knew her worth. Within months, everything shifted. Not because she found the right person, but because she became the right person. She became the version of herself who could receive the love she'd been asking for. The right partner appeared not as a reward, but as a reflection. The outer world simply matched the inner shift. This is how it always works. You do not attract what you want. You attract who you are. So if your good has not yet arrived, do not despair. Do not interpret the delay as denial. Ask instead, who am I being while I wait? What am I believing about myself? What old story is still running in the background, sabotaging the miracle? The waiting is not punishment. It is preparation. It is your chance to become the person who can hold what you've asked for. And here's what nobody tells you about this preparation period. It's not about becoming times worthy, times of your desire. You already are worthy. You were worthy the moment the desire was born in your heart. The waiting is about clearing out the old stories, the old identities, the old ways of being that can't coexist with your new reality. I remember a woman who came to me desperate for a creative opportunity. She was talented, she was prepared, she had done everything right, but nothing was happening. We sat together, and I asked her a simple question. If this opportunity came tomorrow, what would you have to give up? She looked at me, confused. Give up? Nothing. I want this more than anything. Look deeper, I said. What identity would you have to release? And then it hit her. For years, she had been the struggling artist, the underdog, the one who was too pure for commercial success. Her entire social circle revolved around this identity. Her sense of moral superiority came from being overlooked. If she succeeded, who would she be? Would her friends still accept her? Would she lose the very thing that made her feel special, her struggle? The waiting period was giving her time to see this, to choose, to decide if she was willing to trade the comfort of her victim story for the uncertainty of her victory. This is what the universe does in its infinite wisdom. It holds back your good until you're ready to receive it without destroying yourself in the process. Because getting what you want before you're ready is not a blessing, it's a burden you can't carry. Think of all the lottery winners who go bankrupt, the overnight successes who spiral into addiction, the people who get the relationship they begged for only to sabotage it within months. They got their desire before they were prepared to hold it, and it crushed them. So when you're in the waiting, stop fighting it. Stop treating it like you're being punished. Start asking, what is this preparing me for? What old identity am I being asked to release? What new capacity am I being asked to develop? Because here's the secret they don't teach you. The waiting is where the real transformation happens. The manifestation is just the evidence of the inner work you've already done. And sometimes, the waiting reveals that what you thought you wanted isn't what you actually need. The universe has a way of clarifying your desires, of burning away the surface, wants to reveal the deeper longing underneath. You think you want the specific job, but what you really want is the feeling of being valued. You think you want the particular person, but what you really want is the experience of being truly seen. The waiting period strips away the superficial desire and brings you face to face with the essential need. And here's where it gets beautiful when you understand the essential need. You open yourself to infinite ways it can be fulfilled. You stop strangling the single solution, and you start allowing the universe to surprise you with possibilities you never imagined. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Someone releases their death grip on the times how times, and suddenly the floodgates open. Not always in the way they expected, but always in a way that satisfies the deeper longing. The woman who stops obsessing over the specific man and focuses on feeling cherished, suddenly 3 different men appear in her life, each offering genuine interest. The man who stops fixating on the exact job title and opens to the feeling of purposeful work, an opportunity appears from a direction he never considered, one that fulfills him in ways the original job never could have. This is the intelligence of the universe at work. It knows what you need better than you do. It sees the bigger picture while you're focused on a single piece of the puzzle. And here's what makes this even more powerful. When you release resistance, you stop exhausting yourself swimming against the current. You align with the flow of universal intelligence, and suddenly everything becomes easier. Not because the obstacles disappear, but because you're moving with the energy of life itself, not against it. I've watched people spend years trying to force a particular door open, pouring all their energy into making something happen, only to discover that the universe had a better door waiting around the corner. But they were so busy pushing, so determined to have things their way, that they couldn't see what was being offered. When you practice non-resistance, you develop a different kind of power, the power of allowing. You let the universe show you what wants to emerge. You trust that what's meant for you won't miss you, and what's not meant for you isn't worth chasing. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means you act from inspiration rather than desperation. You move when you feel called, not when you feel forced. And there's a completely different energy in those two approaches. Think about a time when you tried to control every detail of a situation. Remember how exhausting that was? The mental energy it consumed? The anxiety that came with trying to anticipate every variable? That's resistance. That's you telling the universe, I don't trust you to handle this, so I'm going to micromanage every moment. Now think about a time when things flowed naturally. Maybe you met the right person at exactly the right time. Maybe an opportunity appeared just when you needed it. Maybe a problem resolved itself in a way you never could have orchestrated. That's what happens when you release resistance. That's the intelligence of the universe at work. Your job isn't to figure out every step of the journey. Your job is to take the next step that's in front of you. To respond to what life is presenting right now. To stay open to possibilities you haven't even imagined yet. Because here's the truth. The universe is infinitely more creative than your limited human mind. It can orchestrate synchronicities, bring people together, create opportunities, and arrange circumstances in ways that would be impossible for you to plan. But it can only do this when you get out of the way. Non-resistance is about getting out of the way. It's about saying, I know what I desire, I'm clear about my intention, and now I trust the universe to bring it to me in the perfect way at the perfect time. And then you relax. You breathe. You go about your day with peace and expectancy, knowing that what's yours is already on its way. This is mastery. This is spiritual maturity. This is what it means to truly partner with the creative power of the universe instead of trying to do everything alone. And here's what happens when you begin to operate from this place of spiritual partnership. Life stops feeling like such a struggle. The resistance melts away. Doors begin to open in the most unexpected ways. You find yourself in the right place at the right time, meeting exactly the right people, receiving exactly the right opportunities. This isn't luck. This isn't coincidence. This is alignment. I remember working with a woman who had been struggling for years to build her business. She was working 18-hour days, exhausted, frustrated, barely making ends meet. She kept saying, I'm doing everything right. Why isn't this working? When we sat down together, I asked her a simple question. Are you doing this business, or is God doing it through you? She looked at me confused. Well, I'm doing it, obviously. Who else would be doing it? And there was her answer. She was operating entirely from her own limited strength, her own limited wisdom, her own limited perspective. She had left God completely out of the equation. I taught her to begin every single day with a simple declaration. Infinite intelligence is now running my business. Divine wisdom guides every decision. The right clients, the right opportunities, the right resources now flow to me effortlessly. Within 3 months, everything shifted. A client she'd approached years ago suddenly called her back. A partnership opportunity appeared out of nowhere. Her income tripled. And here's the remarkable part. She was working half the hours she'd been working before. Same woman, same skills, same market, but completely different energy. She had moved from struggle to flow, from human effort to divine partnership. This is what I want you to understand. You have access to a power that knows how to do everything perfectly. This power created galaxies and orchestrates the seasons. It knows how to grow a single seed into a mighty tree. It knows how to heal your body, arrange your life, and bring your dreams into manifestation. But it can only work through you to the degree that you let it. Every time you worry, you block it. Every time you force, you block it. Every time you try to figure everything out with your limited human mind, you block it. But every time you speak your word with faith, you open the channel. Every time you give thanks before you see the result, you open the channel. Every time you act on divine guidance instead of fearful impulse, you open the channel wider. Think of yourself as a channel for miracles. That's what you are. That's what every human being is meant to be. Not someone who makes things happen through sheer force of will, but someone who allows things to happen through divine alignment. The universe is constantly trying to give you everything you need, but it can only deliver to the address of your consciousness. If you're living at the address of fear and limitation, that's where your packages get delivered. If you're living at the address of faith and expectation, that's where your miracles arrive. So many people pray for change while staying at the same old address. They want different results while maintaining the same thoughts, the same words, the same actions. It doesn't work that way. If you want your life to change, you must change first. You must move to a new address in consciousness. You must begin speaking as if what you desire is already done. You must begin giving thanks as if you've already received it. You must begin acting as the person who already has it. This isn't pretending. This is recognizing the truth that exists in the spiritual realm and calling it forth into the physical realm. When I desired a certain apartment in New York, a beautiful place filled with light, in exactly the right neighborhood, I didn't wait to see it before I began thanking God for it. I didn't say, I hope I get it, or maybe if I'm lucky. I said, I give thanks that I now have the perfect home, filled with beauty and light, and that I enter into it under grace in a perfect way. And I began acting as though it were already mine. I spoke about my new apartment. I planned where my furniture would go. I even bought flowers for it before I had the keys. To the world, this might have looked foolish, but to the spiritual realm, it was a signal. It was a statement of faith that moved the invisible forces into action. And what happened? The apartment came to me in the most miraculous way. The landlord, who had many applicants, chose me for reasons he couldn't explain. The rent was reduced. The timing was perfect. Everything fell into place because I had already claimed it in consciousness before it appeared in form. This is the power of acting from the end. You don't wait for permission from the outer world. You don't wait for conditions to be perfect. You claim your good now, in consciousness, and the outer world has no choice but to conform. But here's what trips people up. They think they must maintain this consciousness every single moment, and when they slip, they panic. They have one doubtful thought and believe they've ruined everything. Let me tell you something important. Your momentary doubts don't destroy your good. What matters is your dominant mental attitude, your prevailing state of consciousness. If you spend most of your time in faith and only occasionally dip into doubt, you're still moving in the right direction. The universe responds to your overall frequency, not every fleeting thought. So don't beat yourself up when a worried thought crosses your mind. Simply notice it, refuse to give it power, and return to your affirmation of truth. I tell my students to treat doubtful thoughts like unwelcome guests. When they knock at the door of your mind, you don't need to invite them in for tea. You simply say, "No thank you, I'm not receiving visitors of that kind today," and you close the door. Then you immediately speak your word of truth again. This is spiritual discipline, not the grim, harsh discipline of forcing yourself into a mold, but the joyful discipline of training your mind to dwell in truth rather than illusion. It's like training a puppy, gentle, consistent, patient, but firm. Your mind will wander. That's natural. Your job is simply to bring it back, again and again, to the truth of your good. And here's something beautiful. The more you practice this, the easier it becomes. Your consciousness begins to stabilize at a higher level. What once required effort becomes natural. The frequency of faith becomes your default setting rather than something you have to strain to maintain. I've watched students go through this transformation. At first, they have to constantly monitor their thoughts, catching themselves every few minutes. But after weeks and months of practice, they find themselves naturally thinking from abundance rather than lack, naturally expecting good rather than bracing for disaster. Their consciousness has been retrained. This is the real work, my dear friend. Not manipulation, not forcing, but transformation. You're not trying to make something happen through sheer willpower. You're allowing yourself to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, as the scripture says. And as your mind is renewed, your world is made new. This is why I always say, watch your thoughts as you would watch a garden. Would you plant weeds and expect roses? Would you water thorns and expect lilies? Of course not. Yet how many of us plant thoughts of lack and expect abundance? How many sow criticism and expect love to bloom? A woman once told me she prayed every morning for prosperity. But But within the hour, she was complaining to her neighbor about how expensive everything had become, how impossible it was to get ahead, how the rich kept getting richer while people like her could barely manage. Then she wondered why her prayers went unanswered. I said to her gently, "My dear, you're praying one thing and speaking another. Your words in the morning plant seeds of abundance, but your words by noon pull them up by the roots. You must be consistent. You must watch not just your prayers but your conversations, not just your affirmations but your casual remarks. You see, the universe doesn't distinguish between your formal prayers and your informal complaints. It responds to your predominant mental attitude. It says yes to whatever you're persistently claiming, whether that claim comes wrapped in prayer language or everyday conversation. This is why consciousness is everything. This is why I tell you, the problem is never out there. It's always in here, in the consciousness you're entertaining, in the atmosphere you're creating within your own mind. When you truly grasp this principle, it becomes impossible to blame external circumstances. You can't point to the economy, to other people, to past mistakes, to present limitations. You recognize that as long as you're locked into a consciousness of limitation, you'll experience limitation regardless of external conditions. And conversely, when you shift into a consciousness of abundance, doors open that you didn't even know existed. I knew a man who lost everything in the market crash. Everything. His business, his savings, his fine home, all gone. Some of his friends became bitter, spent years talking about what they had lost, died still mourning their former glory. But this man did something different. He said, "I am now starting fresh, with nothing but consciousness. And consciousness is all I ever really had anyway. I'm going to build again, but this time I'm going to build from the inside out." He guarded his thoughts carefully. He refused to join the conversations of doom and despair that were everywhere during those years. When people complained, he quietly affirmed abundance. When people spoke of loss, he spoke of new beginnings. Not in a way that denied reality or dismissed others' pain, but in a way that refused to make loss his permanent dwelling place. Within 3 years, he had built a new business, more successful than the first. But he told me something I'll never forget. The real wealth I gained wasn't the money. It was understanding that I could lose everything external and still not lose the one thing that matters, my consciousness. No market crash can take that from me. No external circumstance can rob me of my inner kingdom. This is the freedom that comes from understanding spiritual law. You're no longer hostage to conditions. You're no longer waiting for the world to change before you can experience peace, abundance, or joy. You become the embodiment of the truth you've been affirming. And when you embody a truth, circumstances must shift to match it. This isn't magical thinking, it's the mechanical operation of consciousness. I've watched people transform their entire existence by simply refusing to accept the verdicts of the visible world. A woman once came to me buried under debt, her business failing, creditors at her door. Every logical indicator said she was finished, but she refused to accept that verdict. She began to speak. "I am not a victim of circumstance. Divine substance flows to me now in perfect ways." Day after day, she held this inner position, not with desperation, but with quiet certainty. And within weeks, opportunities appeared that no amount of struggle could have produced. A client she'd forgotten paid an old invoice. An investment she'd written off suddenly matured. A collaboration emerged that brought in steady income. None of it came through force. It came through alignment. This is the difference between labor and manifestation. Labor says, "I must make this happen through effort alone." Manifestation says, "I align myself with the truth, and the universe brings it into form." You've been trying to force solutions when you should be claiming outcomes. You've been pushing doors when you should be declaring them open. There's a difference between working in faith and working in fear. Fear works frantically, always looking over its shoulder. Faith works steadily, knowing the outcome is already secured in the invisible. When you truly understand that your word is law in your universe, you stop begging. You stop pleading with God or the universe or fate to give you what you want. You recognize that you've been given dominion. You've been given the power to name your world into being. And whatever you consistently name becomes your experience. This is why I say your word is your wand. Every statement you make is a decree. Every thought you entertain is a blueprint. You are forever legislating your reality through the words you speak and the images you hold. Most people use their wand carelessly, speaking defeat, limitation, and fear into existence. Then they wonder why life feels so hard. But now that you know, you get to use your wand deliberately. You get to speak only what you wish to see. You get to declare your good instead of describing your problems. This doesn't mean you ignore challenges. It means you refuse to give them authority over your consciousness. When someone asks how you are, and things are difficult, you don't lie, but you also don't rehearse the problem. You say, "I'm in the midst of a wonderful transformation," or "something good is unfolding." You speak from the end. You speak from the solution. You speak as though the invisible truth is more real than the visible circumstance, because it is. This is the secret the mystics have always known. This is what Jesus meant when he said the kingdom of heaven is within you. He wasn't talking about a distant reward after death. He was pointing to the creative power that lives in your consciousness right now. He was telling you that you carry within you the ability to call forth your good. Every person who has ever done anything remarkable has operated from this principle, whether they knew it or not. They held an inner vision that contradicted the outer appearance. They spoke their word into the void. They refused to let circumstances define their destiny, and the universe, being a perfect mirror, reflected back their inner conviction. This is your inheritance. This is your power. And it's time you stopped treating it like a theory and started living it as truth. I've watched people transform their entire reality by simply refusing to argue with someone else's version of them. A woman once told me her family insisted she was bad with money. For years, she proved them right, overspending, accumulating debt, never quite managing to save. But one day, she stopped defending herself, stopped explaining, stopped trying to prove she'd changed. She simply began to see herself differently. She affirmed, "I am divinely guided in all financial matters. Money flows to me easily, and I manage it wisely." Within 6 months, her debt was cleared. Within a year, she had savings she'd never dreamed possible. Her family still occasionally made their little comments, but they bounced off her like rain off glass. She'd stopped giving them permission to name her reality. That's the power of withdrawal. When you withdraw your energy from someone else's opinion, that opinion loses all power over your life. It becomes just noise, irrelevant, impotent, unable to touch the truth of who you are. Now, here's where this gets truly magnificent. When you stop fighting the false image, when you simply hold to your own divine knowing, the universe rushes in to confirm your faith. It must. It's law. Your unwavering inner conviction becomes the mold, and circumstances reshape themselves to match it. The promotion comes, the relationship heals, the money appears. Not because you forced it, not because you manipulated anyone, but because you finally stopped blocking it with your fear and doubt. You see, every time you accepted someone's diminishing label, you were essentially saying to the universe, "Yes, this is who I am. Give me experiences that match this." And the universe, being perfectly obedient, said, "Your wish is my command." It gave you exactly what you claimed as truth. But the moment you change your claim, the moment you stand firm in your divine identity, the universe must respond to that instead. It has no choice. It's not personal. It's principle. This is why Jesus said, "Whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith." The mountain is the accumulated opinion of the world, the false identity, the limiting label, and your word spoken with faith, with absolute conviction, has the power to move it, not through struggle, not through convincing anyone, but through the sheer force of spiritual law, responding to your unshakable faith. So let them think what they want. Let them hold their opinions, their judgments, their little ideas about who you are and what you're capable of. None of it matters. None of it has power unless you give it power. And you, my dear, are done giving your power away. You're reclaiming it. You're standing in the truth of your divine inheritance. You're speaking the word of faith over your life, and that word cannot return void. It must accomplish what you send it forth to do. This is the final freedom. Not freedom from what people think you'll never control that, but freedom from caring. Freedom from needing their validation. Freedom from shrinking or defending or explaining yourself into exhaustion. You are who God says you are. Abundant, worthy, powerful, loved, guided, protected, successful. And that truth doesn't require a single human being's agreement to be valid. It requires only your time's recognition. And here's what changes everything. The moment you begin to operate from this understanding, the world reorganizes itself around your new conviction. Not because you've manipulated anyone, not because you've forced anything, but because you've stopped blocking the natural flow of your good with doubt, fear, and the exhausting performance of trying to earn what's already yours. I've watched this transformation happen countless times. Someone comes to me drowning in financial lack, convinced they need a specific person to hire them, a particular client to say yes, a certain opportunity to materialize. They're gripping so tightly to the how that they're strangling the possibility itself. And then, through repeated work with these truths, through daily recognition of what's real behind the appearance, something shifts. The desperation dissolves. The anxiety quiets. They begin to move through their days with a calm certainty that's unmistakable. And suddenly, opportunities appear from directions they never anticipated. The job they thought was their only hope falls away, and something twice as good arrives through a chance conversation. The client they were chasing stops responding, and 3 new clients appear seemingly out of nowhere, ready and eager. This isn't luck. This is law. When you stop broadcasting the frequency of lack, need, and desperation, you stop attracting circumstances that match that vibration. When you begin to know not hope, not wish, but times that your good is already established, you align with the circumstances that reflect that truth. Your inner conviction becomes your outer experience, always, without exception. So today, right now, you make a choice. You decide that you're no longer going to seek validation from a world that doesn't determine your worth. You're no longer going to make your peace contingent on someone else's opinion, someone else's acceptance, someone else's agreement. You're going to stand firm in what you know to be true. That you are divinely loved, infinitely supplied, and perfectly guided. That your good cannot be stopped by any human force. That the universe itself is organized around your highest unfoldment. And you're going to practice this knowing until it becomes as natural as breathing. Every time doubt whispers, you'll speak the truth louder. Every time fear suggests you're not enough, you'll remember who you really are. Every time the world presents evidence of lack, you'll look past the appearance to the reality behind it. This is your work, not convincing others, not performing for approval, not exhausting yourself trying to make something happen. Your work is simply this: to know the truth and stand unshaken in that knowing. To be so rooted in your divine inheritance that nothing, not criticism, not rejection, not delay, not disappointment, can move you from your foundation. To become so certain of your value that you stop asking the world to confirm it. This is where your freedom lives. This is where your power rests. This is where everything you've been seeking has been waiting for you all along. Not out there in someone's approval, but here. Right here, in your willingness to finally recognize what's always been true. You don't need their validation. You never did.